The long-awaited sixth assessment by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has very little good news for South Africa. The United Nations report says the country will experience an increase in extreme weather, including droughts and fire and even flooding as a result of climate change. The report is the first in a series linked to the IPCC's sixth assessment report, which will be completed in 2022. And it indicates that unprecedented climate change events are expected to hit the planet, some of which have already started. Well, let's take you now to the Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and Environmental Affairs, Barbara Creecy. Good evening to you, and thank you so much for your time. When we look at this report, specifically the outcomes for South Africa and the scenario that is projected for South Africa, it paints a very grim picture. What are you most worried about after having read the report?
Good evening, Kathy, and greetings to all your viewers. Yes, indeed. I think this report, while we welcome the serious scientific work that has gone into producing the report over the last 7 years, I think that we do have to agree that its findings are indeed very sobering. I think that really, Kathy, the key issue that we have to focus on is this number of 1.5 degree average temperature increase above pre-industrial times. And really what this number tells us is that once the average global temperatures go above this increased level, we are going to see a whole range of extreme weather phenomena that will make the Southern African region very uninhabitable for humankind. Because part of what the report tells us is that the Southern African region is warming up at close to twice the global average. Now, I think that what is also important about this report is that it's not too late for action. And the report is telling us that across the globe, all nations will have to join together to reduce emissions by 2030, and we will have to have this long-term target of net zero by 2050. Now, South Africa is committed to doing our bit, and we have already worked on a revised nationally determined contribution that will see our greenhouse gases reducing by 27% by 2030. And we have also brought forward our decline in our greenhouse gas emissions by 10 years. Originally, we had a peak plateau decline scenario with the decline starting in 2035. But I think that science has made us understand that this is not appropriate. We also have a long-term aspiration to reach net zero by 2050. And you would know that in February, the President set up the Climate Commission, and this commission is busy researching pathways that can be implemented by 7 vulnerable sectors of our economy so that we can achieve this particular objective of net zero by 2050.
Of course, Minister Creecy, one of the challenges that we've had in this country is that big industry that is responsible, that are seen as the biggest contributors in terms of carbon emissions, have been failing to meet the targets that have been set. And in the absence of that, it means the country may ultimately fail in reaching its own national targets. How are you going to change that and hold industries a lot more accountable? You know, Eskom can say, well, we've improved in terms of our emissions, but they're still far off target.
Kathy, I think that that's a very important point, that reaching these global targets is a whole of society responsibility. Government absolutely cannot do it alone. I think what I draw strength and hope from is that Eskom itself has committed to net zero emissions by 2050. Sasol has made similar commitments, And we're seeing a whole range of different industry players coming to the party and making presentations to the Climate Commission that they too are committed to building a low-carbon economy and a climate-resilient society by 2050. Of course, the devil is always in the detail. And one of the important issues in the detail is the question of climate justice. And what we understand is that certain areas in our country, for example, in Mpumalanga, this is the area where most of our coal-fired power stations are located. It's a part of our country that is heavily dependent on the coal value chain. We estimate that there are between 80 and 100,000 direct and indirect jobs in this value chain in Mpumalanga. And as we transition over the next 30 years to this low carbon economy and climate resilient society, we have to make sure that those who are in the the coal value chain are not the people that carry a disproportionate burden for the transition. I think what's very interesting is the socio-economic studies that Eskom is currently doing on the coal-fired power stations that they are planning to decommission before 2030. What's also interesting is this proof of concept project that we're working on around Komati Power Station, where what we're looking at is how can you repurpose this power station, how can you save jobs, how can you create new industries in that particular area so that both the direct and the indirect livelihoods that are currently tied up with the power station are saved and, in fact, perhaps could even be grown.
Does carbon tax work in as far as reducing the carbon emissions of industries, given the fact that it is a way of penalizing industry, or do we need to be looking at something else?
Well, I think that there are other countries in the world where carbon tax is definitely one of the mechanisms that is promoting what is a global shift away from coal towards lower carbon energy generation, but also lower carbon manufacturing and production processes. Obviously, we're just at the start of introducing our carbon tax, and at the moment that tax is very low. We are in an introductory phase. We are working to allocate carbon budgets. But over a period of time, I think that this tax will be, it will probably be higher. And no doubt it will also incentivize people to look at alternative sources of energy and also different kinds of production processes that are less carbon intensive.
One of the biggest challenges that we've had in the country is that already we've been exposed to some of the adverse weather conditions, that are predicted to continue increasing in our future if, of course, the work of reducing these carbon emissions is not effective. Many of the times, the impression created is that we've been caught off guard, whether it's the droughts, whether it's the floods, etc. How are we going to change that? Because ultimately, what's coming from the research is that we can expect and anticipate more droughts, more floods, more adverse weather conditions. How is government policy going to actually be able to cater and preempt that?
Well, I think that the first issue is the work that we are doing on the low emissions development strategy. And obviously, if you take a sector like agriculture, for example, the department is already looking at crop variations, cultivation methods that use less water, and so on. And obviously, they would then, through the work that they do, whether it's in the small farmer settlement program or even in the work that they do with commercial agriculture, they would obviously be introducing those concepts. But as far as our own department is concerned, we have been having discussions in the South African Weather Services to say that isn't it time that in addition to predicting weather events, we start to do some public outreach work so that we can help communities to understand why are they becoming vulnerable to drought, why are they becoming vulnerable to extreme storms, and what adaptation measures can they take so that they are better able to cope with these processes. Last year, Cabinet approved the National Adaptation Strategy, and we have now worked with all provincial governments and all municipalities to develop adaptation strategies. And these strategies have to look at how you weatherproof built infrastructure, how you start to align municipal budgets over a long period of time so that we can make our infrastructure more climate resilient. And I think these are all important initiatives that we are supporting so that our society as a whole can develop what we call climate resilience.
Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and Environmental Affairs, Barbara Creecy, thanks for your time tonight.